The call that fractured the foundation of my world came while I was suspended between earth and sky, looking down on the city I had built. From the hushed cabin of the helicopter, the Seattle skyline was a testament to my life's work, a forest of glass and steel towers that rose from the ground under my direction. The Sterling Associates insignia, a stylized S that echoed the curve of a cantilever, was subtly etched into the cornerstones of half a dozen of them. I saw the Olympus Tower, its crystalline spire piercing the morning mist, a project they said couldn't be done. I saw the Cascade Center, its terraced gardens cascading down its sides like a concrete waterfall, my answer to the soulless glass boxes that had begun to dominate the city. Each building was a child of mine, born from ink and steel, from sleepless nights and brutal negotiations. My architectural philosophy was simple. A structure's beauty must come from its truth, the honesty of its materials, the integrity of its foundation. A facade, no matter how beautiful, was nothing without a powerful, unshakable core. My headset crackled, slicing through the rhythmic thrum of the rotors. "Ma'am?" my assistant's voice came through, crisp and professional. "Miss Dubois from Azure Events is on the line. She says it is a matter of some urgency regarding the Sterling de Winter wedding." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Azure Events. The chosen orchestrators of my son Julian's ascent into the stratosphere of Seattle's old money aristocracy. Their price tag was astronomical, their discretion legendary. For them to call me directly was a breach of a very expensive protocol. I signaled to the pilot to continue his holding pattern, the city revolving slowly beneath us like a massive, intricate blueprint. "Patch her through, Sarah." A voice, smooth and chilled as the waters of the Puget Sound, filled my ears. "Mrs. Sterling, thank you for taking my call. I have been asked to reach out to you directly to ensure a message of some delicacy is conveyed with the utmost clarity." Her words were perfectly spaced, each one a polished stone dropped into a deep well. "As you know, Mr. Sterling and Mrs. De Winter are curating an event that reflects the highest standards of taste and heritage. They are deeply committed to ensuring the atmosphere is one of flawless elegance." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air 1,000 feet above the city. In light of this, they've had to make some difficult decisions regarding elements that might feel incongruous. They hope you'll understand that this is a forward-looking occasion, a day for new foundations, not for revisiting older, more complicated structures. Older, more complicated structures. It was the language of demolition. I was a building from a bygone era, my architecture deemed too raw, too honest for the sleek, featureless landscape they intended to build. I, Genevieve Sterling, the woman whose name was synonymous with structural integrity, was being condemned. She delivered the wrecking ball with an apology that felt like an invoice. "Genevieve," she said, the unearned familiarity a calculated insult. "Julian asked me to tell you this personally, to spare you any public discomfort. He said, and I quote, 'This union is about solidifying a future, not being anchored to the rubble of the past. Please tell my mother her contribution is appreciated, but her presence would be a distraction. He sends his love, of course.'" Rubble of the past. The words hit with the force of a physical impact, the pressure in the cabin suddenly immense. He had not merely uninvited me, he had declared me a ruin. The son for whom I had laid every brick of this life had just signed my demolition permit. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the sanitized air of the helicopter feeling thin and useless. "I see," I said, my voice a dead calm that I did not recognize as my own. "Thank you for your clarity, Ms. Dubois." I cut the connection and stared down at the Olympus Tower, my tower, glinting in the sun. From this height, I could see its foundations, the massive concrete and steel piers plunging deep into the bedrock. I had overseen their pouring myself, standing in the mud and rain, because I knew that a skyscraper is only as strong as its deepest, most hidden point. Julian had forgotten that. He had become so enamored with the view from the penthouse that he had forgotten the grit, the concrete, and the woman who had built the foundation he so carelessly stood upon. The call for the money, the $375,000 that had served as my severance package, had come on a rainy Thursday night. Julian's voice had been a carefully constructed performance of distress. He spoke of a legacy project, a capstone to my own career. "Mother, a piece of land has become available on the waterfront. It's the last undeveloped parcel. I've commissioned a preliminary design for the Sterling Eco Tower, a building that won't just be carbon neutral, it will be carbon negative. It's revolutionary. It's our future." He spoke my language, weaving in terms like biophilic design, structural honesty, and geothermal piers. He sent me a glossy digital prospectus filled with renderings of a soaring plant-covered tower that looked like something I might have designed myself. He was selling me a reflection of my own dreams. "The survey and soil analysis contracts need to be signed by Friday, or we lose the parcel," he'd said, his voice cracking with feigned urgency. "The De Winters are watching this closely. It's a test." To show that the Sterling name is about the future, not just the past, I wouldn't ask, but the capital is tied up in other projects. I remember the flicker of doubt, a ghost of an instinct. The renderings were too perfect, the timeline too compressed. An architect's eye, my eye, noticed the way the light in the images didn't quite match the building's supposed orientation to the sun. A small, almost imperceptible flaw in the design. But my heart, a mother's heart, chose to ignore it. The idea that Julian was finally embracing the soul of my work, the desire to build something meaningful rather than merely profitable, was a siren song I could not resist. I had spent my life making sacrifices for him, ever since my husband Robert died and left me a widow at 34 with a 9-year-old son and a fledgling architectural firm operating out of our garage. I remembered the nights spent hunched over a drafting table, Robert's old T-square cool beneath my tired hands, while Julian slept on a cot in the corner. I remembered selling my own wedding ring to make payroll, telling Julian it was being redesigned. Every beam I hoisted, every contract I won, was to ensure he would never know the terror of the foundation cracking beneath his feet. I had built him a fortress of success and security. So I made the transfer. The money came from a trust I had established with the profits from the Olympus Tower project, a fund I had named the Robert Sterling Legacy Grant, intended to fund scholarships for underprivileged architecture students. I had betrayed my own legacy, I realized now, to fund the facade of his. The bank confirmation email arrived with its sterile, digital finality. I had just purchased the most expensive wedding ticket in history for a seat that I was never meant to occupy. The knowledge of the fraud did not come from an assistant's discovery. It came from a deeper, more painful place. After the call in the helicopter, a profound and terrible silence had descended upon my life. I walked through the halls of my minimalist waterfront home, a place I had designed as a sanctuary of light and peace, but it now felt like a mausoleum. The floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the spectacular views of the Sound now felt like the cold, unblinking eyes of a world that had witnessed my humiliation. It was in this state of quiet desolation that I had a visitor. A young woman named Cora appeared at my door, unannounced. She was an architectural history student from the University of Washington, and she was doing her thesis on my early pre-fame work. She carried a roll of original blueprints aged to the color of old ivory. They were for a small pro bono project I had done decades ago, a community center in a forgotten, struggling neighborhood, the first project I completed after Robert's death. "I found these in the city archives, Mrs. Sterling," she'd said, her eyes alight with a genuine scholarly passion. "No one's written about this building, but it's perfect. The way you use the reclaimed timber, the passive solar design, it's not about ego. It's about creating a space that serves the people who use it. It's honest." We spent the afternoon in my study, surrounded by books and architectural models, talking about integrity and purpose. She spoke of how that small, forgotten building had become the heart of its community. She saw a truth in my work that my own son had never bothered to look for. Before she left, I asked her about her own story. She told me she was an orphan, raised in the foster system, and that it was the thoughtful design of a state-run library that had sparked her love for architecture, a space that made her feel safe and seen. There was a quiet strength about her, a resilience I recognized in myself. I felt a connection to her, a sense of shared foundation that transcended blood. It was our conversation about honesty that prompted me to make the call. The next morning, I contacted the Seattle Department of Planning and Development, and then the city's top geological surveying firm, the one Julian had named in his prospectus. Neither had any record of a proposed eco-tower project. The parcel of land he had described was a protected marine habitat. The entire structure of his story was a fabrication, a phantom building with no foundation. The $375,000 had been wired, I soon discovered, directly to Azure Events, with a memo line that read, "Floral and Couture budget." He had not just lied. He had taken the money I set aside to honor his father's memory and used it to buy flowers and a dress. The cruelty of it was breathtaking in its precision. The second call from Julian came that evening. I took it in my study. The old blueprints for the community center still spread across my desk. Cora had returned to ask a follow-up question and was sitting quietly in an armchair by the fire. I put the phone on speaker. "I just got off the phone with Isabel's father," he seethed. "He heard a rumor that the venue has been put on hold." "What did you do?" "I have taken control of my assets, Julian," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "Your assets," he shrieked, his voice rising to an ugly, incredulous pitch. "This is my wedding, my life. You have no right." "You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see me happy, to see me become my own man. You're just the baggage, remember, the complicated, ugly structure that had to be torn down to make way for something beautiful." He was shouting now, the words tumbling out in a torrent of long, festering resentment. "You and your obsession with honest materials and solid foundations. You're a relic, Mother. This is a new world. It's about image, about the brand. Something you would never understand." Cora flinched, a small, involuntary movement. I remained perfectly still. I let him finish his tirade, a storm of insults that revealed not my flaws, but the profound emptiness at his core. When he was done, panting into the phone, I spoke a single sentence. "The brand you're so concerned with, Julian, is my name, and you are no longer authorized to use it." I disconnected the call. Cora looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and something else, something I recognized as fierce, protective loyalty. In that moment, the future began to pivot. The old blueprint was no longer viable. It was time to draw a new one. My deconstruction of his world was not an act of emotional rage. It was an architectural inevitability. A structure built on a fraudulent foundation is doomed to collapse. I simply expedited the process. My first call was to the manager of the Seattle Grand Atrium, the stunning glass conservatory I had designed a decade ago, and the venue for the wedding. "Michael," I said, "I am invoking Clause 17B of the venue charter. The Sterling de Winter event is canceled. My team will be in touch regarding the logistics of refunding the other stakeholders." He did not question it. He owned the atrium, but my holding company owned the land beneath it. My next call was to the celebrated chef, a man whose first restaurant I had designed pro bono when he was an unknown talent. "Antoine," I said, "your contract for the de Winter wedding has been dissolved by the primary benefactor. You will be compensated for your time." My third call was to the jeweler who was crafting Cordelia's wedding band, a man who sourced the flawless diamonds for my high-end watch collection. Each call was quiet, precise, and final. I was not destroying my son's wedding. I was dismantling an unsafe structure built with stolen materials on compromised ground. The pièce de résistance was the conversation with Ms. Dubois at Azure Events. She called me, her voice a frantic, unrecognizable squeak. "Mrs. Sterling, everything is unraveling. Your name is being cited everywhere. You have no authority." "On the contrary, Ms. Dubois," I said, calmly swirling the brandy in my glass. "I have all the authority. You see, when you planned this wedding, you booked my buildings, my chefs, my florists, my musicians. You moved pieces around on a board that I own. You thought you were serving the interests of your client, Mr. Sterling. But you and he forgot a fundamental rule of architecture. You must always respect the foundation. And the foundation, Miss Dubois, has just rescinded its support." That night, I went into my husband's old study. From a locked drawer, I removed the thick vellum document that represented Julian's inheritance, a 40% controlling stake in Sterling Associates, to be transferred to him upon his 30th birthday. I did not rip it. That felt too emotional, too theatrical. Instead, I fed it, page by page, into the office shredder. The sound was a quiet, mechanical whir, the sound of a legacy being unwritten, of a blueprint being irrevocably erased. The resulting confetti of my son's future fell like snow into the wastebasket. The confrontation, when it came, was not a storm, but a cold, miserable drizzle. Julian, Cordelia, and her parents met me in the boardroom at the top of the Olympus Tower. The view of the city, my city, was spectacular. They spoke of public humiliation, of breached social contracts, of the De Winter name being tarnished. I listened without interruption. When they were finished, I walked to the window. "Look down there," I said, my voice quiet. "Every light you see is a home, a business, a dream. They are held up by structures of steel and concrete, yes, but also of trust and integrity. What you call a social contract, I call a foundation." Julian did not just lie to me. He compromised the foundation of this family and of this company by committing fraud. He used my name to build a facade, and I will not have the Sterling name associated with a structure that is fundamentally unsound. I turned back to them. "The $375,000 will be repaid. You will sell whatever you must, but it will be returned to the scholarship fund from which it was stolen. As for the wedding, consider it a failed project. The plans were flawed from the beginning." I looked at my son, seeing not a man, but a hollow, desperate boy. "You wanted a future without me, Julian. You now have it. The Sterling name and all its assets are no longer a part of your structural support. I suggest you find out, for the first time in your life, if you can stand on your own." In the months that followed, Julian and the De Winters faded into the quiet ignominy that befalls those who fly too close to the sun on borrowed wings. I, on the other hand, began to build something new. Cora had become a permanent fixture in my life, first as an intern, then as a protégé. She possessed an intuitive understanding of architectural integrity that could not be taught. She saw the soul in a building, the story in its bones. I did not give her Julian's inheritance. That felt like replacing one faulty component with another. Instead, I made her a junior partner in a new venture. We established the Foundation Project, a non-profit wing of my firm. With an initial endowment of $10 million, our mission was to design and build beautiful, functional, and honest spaces for communities that architecture had forgotten. Homeless shelters, women's centers, public libraries, and schools. We would build things that mattered. Our first project was a new community center, built on the hallowed ground of the old one Cora had first shown me, which had since fallen into disrepair. The design was a collaboration, a fusion of my experienced hand and her fresh vision. It was a structure of reclaimed timber, rammed earth, and glass, a building that seemed to rise from the earth itself, honest and strong. The final scene of my old life, and the first of my new one, took place not in a boardroom, but at a dusty construction site. I stood with Cora, looking over the newly laid foundation of our building. The steel rebar crisscrossed in the afternoon sun, a skeleton of immense strength, ready to support something beautiful. Cora unrolled a set of blueprints on the hood of my car, her hands smudged with dirt. "The load-bearing walls are here," she said, tracing a line with her finger. "The core is solid." I looked at her, at the passion and integrity shining in her eyes, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in 30 years. Julian had been the soaring, dramatic spire I had built to impress the world. But Cora, she was the foundation, unseen, unglamorous, but utterly essential. She was the truth of the structure. "It is," I said, placing my hand over hers on the blueprint. "It is unshakable. I had lost a son, but I had found a successor, not of my name, but of my values." The legacy of Genevieve Sterling would not be written in the height of her skyscrapers, but in the strength of her foundations, the ones built not of steel and glass, but of purpose, integrity, and the quiet, revolutionary act of building something honest in a world of beautiful facades. And that was a legacy that could never be torn down.